Hi, thanks for tuning in. This is the US Futures weekly chart analysis for the week ending 26th of July 2024. First chart is the US dollar index futures. You can see that price remains around this 104 level, which we've been looking at for quite some time now. Spread narrowed considerably this week. Volume reduced to below average. There was not enough strength in the market to push higher, but there was not enough weakness in the market to push lower. And in response, price has just gone sideways right at this important level of 104. You can see that here is the lows of the range, and price is just holding on there without much direction this week. I expect when some sort of fundamental news is released, the market will respond. At this point, it's like an equilibrium's been reached between the buyers and the sellers, and the low volume suggests that activity was quite low this week. Often when price contracts considerably like this, there's an expansion in response. So look for spread to expand, possibly on news next week. This is the E-mini S&P 500 index futures. You can see that prices pulled back this week. We saw spreads narrow up here on about average volume and suggested at the time some supply might have been drawn out. And in response, we have seen two down bars where supply has been drawn out and prices closed this little gap, which we mentioned back previously. And prices closed right at that level this week. So you've had supply drawn out, volumes have been high, so activity in the market is high. At some point, you would expect the market to make an attempt to consolidate. That may happen here around the 5,500. Next lower level is down here, just above the 5,250 on this chart. So watch to see the response next week. I expect you'll see initially an attempt to consolidate, but whether the market's ready to do that or if supply is still being drawn out, we'll just have to wait to see what the response is like. US 10-year note futures, and they have been consolidating this week. We put in the lines, we saw the breakdown here, and then a reluctance to move lower. Here we saw price push up, consolidate for a period, and then break out above that level. Prices then consolidated for a period. It's made an attempt to break out, but you note that spread was considerably narrower than this breakout bar or this response. So the thrust is shortening as price is moving higher at the moment, but price remains above this breakout line. There was some supply drawn out last week, but it wasn't overwhelming. And this week, there was a small test for supply early, below the previous bar's close, and then a push higher on an increase in volume and up almost to the breakout bar's highs. This is the market consolidating, absorbing supply, and preparing for an attempt to push higher if trading conditions are favourable. Copper price futures continue to see supply drawn out. You can see the spread narrowed considerably this week on a slight increase in volume. So there's an attempt to support the market. It did appear the market was going to consolidate up here, but further supply was drawn out. Price threatened to break down again last week. And generally with downside follow through in response, you would suggest that this is a confirmed breakdown. But spreads narrowed so much and volume did increase slightly, so there's certainly an attempt to support the market again. Back here, you can see there was a little consolidation in the past, and that's where prices closed, right level with that. So there is some support at this level, and I expect the market is going to attempt to consolidate sort of at this level just above the $4. So we'll see what the response is next week. You've effectively had a confirmed breakdown, but there's certainly been an attempt to support the market as price moves down towards the $4 level. Gold price futures. Gold price futures have made an attempt to break out more recently and saw supply drawn out on this bar, and we've had an attempt to consolidate here as prices move just back below the breakout line. Spreads narrowed slightly, volume increased further to well above the average, and on that volume, prices closed in the middle, which suggests that buying support has emerged and there's a defence of this market. There's buying coming in. You may get an initial test for supply next week, especially as volumes are so high. That would look something like this. This would only be early next week, and then the market will respond depending on how much supply is drawn out and which side is holding the upper hand. I expect that the sellers were holding the upper hand here and initially on this bar, and the buyers have gained the upper hand again later in the week this week, with the close off the lows on an increase in volume and spread being slightly narrower than the previous week. I think the buyers are trying to gain the upper hand again. You may see an early test for supply, and then if supply is found to be low, an attempt to continue higher again. Silver price futures always trade very similar to gold, but slightly exaggerated. Here's the highs of the range, lows of the range through here. Price threatened to break down last week, and you've had downside follow through in response. You would suggest that was a breakdown. Spread did narrow though. Volume reduced slightly, so selling pressure wasn't overwhelming. So this looks like the market was actually stretching lower to find enough buyers to satisfy the sellers who were profit taking or jumping out for whatever reason. This market would move higher again relatively easily because volumes aren't that high. You've had the market attempting to consolidate here adjacent to this trading in the background. And if gold tests for supply and attempts to move higher, you'll probably see this market at least push up to this level here. We'll do that fairly comfortably. There may be some supply that will need absorbing through here. But it doesn't look like selling pressure was really overwhelming this week. It looked like demand was lacking in the market, and that caused price to move lower with a wider spread than the volume suggests. Like crude price futures, also continued lower this week. We've got the breakdown line here that the market did challenge for one bar, attempted to consolidate, supply was drawn out, and prices now pushed lower and down to the previous level where some absorption was taking place. I expect the market will attempt to consolidate here, especially with this shakeout in the background. If further supply was drawn out, you'd see price coming down to this level in here, but I'm not envisaging that at the moment. I expect the market will attempt to consolidate sort of in this level here. So we'll just see how price goes there. There has been downside follow through. There is previous support to the left here. So I expect the market will at least make an attempt to consolidate there. And it's above the 75 level. Euro, US dollar currency futures. Here was the highs that were being challenged. We saw some modest supply drawn out here, and the market's come back without much intent. The market's still trading within the range of this up bar in the background, and volumes reduced this week and are below average just slightly, so no real intent being shown in the market. I expect this market will trade just the inverse of the US dollar. When it begins to move, especially if it starts to expand in range, in response to that contraction in range this week, this market will trade the inverse of that. Activity was reduced this week. There's no obvious sign this market wants to break out. It just looks comfortable trading the inverse of the US dollar at the moment. We'll see if we get some more information from the British pound. Highs of the range come through here. It was only the weakest attempt to break out here. This was a serious attempt to break out, but the market immediately reversed and pushed lower. There was a serious attempt to absorb supply through here. Then the market in response has pushed higher. Now this week spreads narrowed quite considerably, but volume was also reduced, so they balanced nicely. Price remains well within the previous up bars range. So this market is stronger than the euro, no doubt, but also trading the inverse of the US dollar to a large degree. Japanese yen currency futures have been a bit of a wild ride over the last little bit. Price really threatened to break down here, but picked itself up off the mat, possibly with a little bit of intervention, and the market has recovered, pushed back above the lows of the range. You've got the highs of the range will come through here. It's actually a complex low through there. So there's more a zone of resistance above, and that's exactly where the market moved up to. Has drawn out a little bit of supply, which is understandable under the circumstances. Volume was increased to well above average, but spread also increased to balance that. So no serious anomaly there. The market's pushed up pretty well, and we did note back here in the background that buying support came in a few times in this market. And it didn't really look like any of that had been dumped through here. More buying support came in on this bar. So this market is making an attempt to recover here, a stronger attempt than's happened previously. So we just have to watch carefully how this market transitions. I expect in response to the high volume this week, you will be getting some testing for supply on a daily basis, like this, and see how much supply is actually drawn out. I wouldn't expect any serious challenge to this level in the near future. I would be surprised, and I'd be surprised if it was successful. I would expect there'll be supply drawn out from the left if the market did attempt to challenge that breakout line. At the moment, price has done a pretty good job to reverse over the last month, and it's moved up to the highs of the range. I would expect some testing for supply and absorption to take place prior to any serious attempt to move higher. Aussie dollar currency futures were quite weak this week. You saw the market push up, but without much intent here. This was a real half-hearted push higher, mostly trading the inverse of the US dollar. In response, price just fell lower, drifted lower on no real volume. This week, volume has increased, selling pressures increased, and the market's moved below the lows of the old range here and is threatening to break down. Now, we'll just have to wait and see what the response is next week, because there was a little bit of speculative support off the lows by the looks here. But this is a threatening down bar on an increase in volume, slightly above average volume, and if successful, would see price probably move down to this level, 64.5. So the response is important next week in this market. Bitcoin futures were in consolidation mode all week this week. We saw price dip lower recently down here and threaten to break down, but there was some buying support immediately emerge. Price then gapped up and over this line, pushed higher last week, and this week price has moved into consolidation mode. This is absorbing supply any supply that's been drawn out after price broke down, that was a threatening down bar, and anyone stuck up here who'd only purchased up here would have been feeling vulnerable. And some of them have chosen to get out for whatever reason. You can see volume was very high this week, but the market's done a good job. The close right up near its high suggests that the buyers are holding the upper hand and the market's attempting to absorb the supply drawn out from the sellers. It's a good effort. Because volume was so high, you would almost certainly expect to see a secondary test for supply early in the week. Now, the ideal scenario would be for spread to be narrower than the previous bar and volume to be reduced, preferably considerably reduced, to show that selling pressure had now reduced, and that would allow the price to move higher in response. If, however, supply continues to be drawn out, you may see price come back further or more deeply to threaten those sellers prior to any serious attempt to move higher. But at this stage, the market's done a pretty good job to absorb supply. I would expect a little test for supply early next week, and then the market will respond depending on how much supply is actually drawn out. Just back to the US dollar index futures very quickly before we close. Price remains at the 104 level. Spread contracted considerably this week on a reduction in volume. Activity was low in the market. Price remains at this important level on the chart, and I expect there's some chance that spread will expand in response this week. It's not really giving you any great indication on the response. This bar suggests buying support is present. These two bars suggest selling pressure is present. And the low volume this week shows that activity was low. So there's not much being given away here, and it may be that some sort of economic news is the catalyst for a move in one direction or the other. Okay, thanks for your time. We'll see you next week. See ya.